Hello everyone, welcome back to the Replay Studio and another video for Love, Death and Robot Volume 2. Long-awaited Volume 2. Coming off of a very strong Season 1. For me, the spiritual successor for Heavy Metal and the Animatrix. And so I've been looking forward to this so much. As someone who loves animation so much, it was so important to me that this story continues to be told. Hopefully we get a third and a fourth season, just to kind of encourage more creators to actually go this route and develop more animation that's not just purely for kids, because with all these live action adaptations that are happening, I think a lot of people feel as though animation isn't its own medium, but it quite frankly is. And many of the team for Love, Death and Robot, even behind the camera, when they talk about some of their inspirations for this stuff, it's what they imagined or what they saw growing up. Some of those animated stories that they were probably too young to watch at the time. I can speak to that because I did see heavy metal at a very young age, and I probably should not have, but I've never forgotten it, and I want to see similar stories being told. So I'm glad that this was greenlit, and hopefully we get to see more. So I'm going to be going through with each episode, as you know, I hate to rank things. So I'm just going to be going through episode by episode, and we'll have a discussion about what my interpretation of these episodes are.
Minimum safe distance from affected lost territory. Press 1.
Fluff and fall, motherfucker!
And the first episode of this volume is Automated Customer Service. A very interesting episode, if for nothing else, because it was the very first episode. I went into this thinking, okay, and I imagine for the very first volume of Love, Death and Robots, the showrunners decided they needed to come out swinging, and so they needed that one episode to really hook the audience. And Sunny's Edge was the very perfect episode to actually do that, to say, okay, this is what we're about, this is what you can expect from us. And that was perfect. And then going into this episode, I was expecting the next Sunny's Edge, and it caught me, and I just found myself cracking up the entire episode because it was just so unexpected. And Automated Customer Service follows essentially this group of retirees. I think we didn't see anyone younger in this episode, who have, I guess, they're just enjoying life as it is. We saw, I did wonder whether this entire world only had an older folks, because we didn't see anyone that was younger, and it was playing up the idea that machines are doing everything for humans, and perhaps this is their current state as a result of that. We saw two people at a tennis court, but they weren't actually playing themselves. The machines were playing for them. We even saw a group crossing the street, and they were all on top the machines who are crossing the street for them. So mankind has gotten to the point where it's not we're not doing anything ourselves. We have all these tools to do it for us. But in general, I felt it was playing up the idea of customer service and calling customer service, and how often they're not very helpful in solving the situation at hand. And so we went through the entire episode with this one elderly woman whose her vacuum bot starts to malfunction, and it decided that she was a threat. It went into purge mode, and so she called customer service to get some help, and customer service was of absolutely no help at all. This dangerous machine has gone rogue in my home, and the first recommendation was, okay, you need to find a way to distract it, this machine, with laser beams, and then physically get to it to turn it off. And at one point, I even gave her the option of using her dog, and of throwing her dog at it as a distraction. And she said, "No, I'm not doing that." It was just one of those. It was the funny episode. Now that I think about it, actually, I do wonder. I would have liked for this to have been the fourth or fifth episode, if only because the other episodes are so heavy in terms of the subject matter that they approach, and so dark. It would have been nice to have that levity somewhere somewhere in the middle. But all in all, it was a fantastic episode. It had me laughing from beginning to end. So I absolutely loved automated customer service.
Run, you fucking extra!
All right, so moving on. Benga! Episode 2, titled Ice. This was, in terms of the animation, this was definitely my favorite. The style of the animation used was my favorite this entire volume. And it did remind me quite a bit of the animation used in Zima Blue in Volume 1. So, and that was my favorite episode for Volume 1. So I do wonder whether the same creative team is actually behind this as well. It's really, really unique and interesting to see their work. But Ice essentially follows this family attempting to adapt to their new life on this planet. So they're not on Earth. I think they mentioned leaving Earth behind or something to that effect. But it follows two brothers, Fletcher and Cedric. Cedric being the older and Fletcher being the younger. But one of the two brothers, Fletcher, is actually modified, which appears to allow him increased stamina, strength, and all of that. It's interesting. They didn't throughout the entire episode. There was no. I don't believe they gave us the reasoning as to why Cedric wasn't modified. And initially, I actually thought, okay, perhaps they were modified to survive on this planet. Perhaps that was necessary, but of course, then we were introduced to Cedric, and he's still very much functional there. So it doesn't appear that is the case. So it doesn't appear they're modified out of necessity so much as, just to be better. And that came up in a conversation between Fletcher and Cedric, in terms of how their parents speak about them. And the father feeling as though, Cedric is spoiled, and perhaps he was to some extent, but as Cedric, said to his brother, when they talk about me, it's as though they, or they talk about you, it's as though they feel you are better than I am, and him by virtue somehow lesser. And as someone who has siblings, and I'm on the reverse because for me I'm the youngest. I'm the youngest of 6 siblings, and so I've never had any power, Cedric. I've never had any power. I've always felt the lesser. So it was interesting to see that that dynamic between him and Fletcher, and wanting to prove himself. And of course, as we went through the story, they met up with some of Fletcher's friends who wanted to do this reckless stunt to race across a sheet of ice where some frost whales that I think are native to this planet, who are who break through the ice at a particular time in the night when all the machines have stopped. And so their aim was to race across the ice before the whale broke through. 7 attempts. That's what she said. 7. She lied, or well, she just wasn't sure. But nonetheless, they were racing across. Fletcher fell, injured his leg, and Cedric had to stop to save him. And of course, later on, it was revealed that Fletcher was quite fine. He feigned injury because he wanted Cedric to develop that confidence that he needed. That okay, you are my older brother, and I know. Even if you aren't modified, that you will do anything to protect me, and that was just heartwarming to actually see them have that moment. As someone who has a lot of siblings who I often I cannot say this enough, disagree with. I often disagree with, but at the end of the day, they will do what's best for you. So that was one of my favorite moments this entire volume. So, Benga!
I've been alive 218 years. I've seen too much. But she makes everything new. I love seeing things through her little eyes. So full of life. Not dead. Like yours.
Alright, on to the next episode titled Pop Squad. And oh my god, this was a dark episode. This was a dark episode. There was a lot to dissect here. There was just so much to dissect. So essentially, Pop Squad follows this this police officer that's a part of this disposal unit, from what appears to be a world where humanity has discovered how to extend their life to the point where they no longer need to procreate, right? And so the one of the very first scenes that we see is Briggs, which is the name of the character that we follow. He happens upon a scene where this couple committing a crime, and the crime is actually them having a child. And so it's for him to come in for the offenders to be arrested, but the onus is on him to eliminate the threat, the supposed threat, the children that's there. And so he kills the kids that are actually there. But then he immediately moves on. He leaves that very gruesome scene, takes off into the clouds, and what appears to be a city in the clouds where the upper elites live versus those that are at the very bottom. But that part of the story didn't strike me as much as what came next. In part because, again, someone who watches a lot of animation, I've seen a lot of anime, and I've seen this part of the story played out before in things like Armitage or Battle Angel Alita, where the upper class are living above the clouds and the lower class are below. But the thing that struck me as interesting in this particular story, that was unique to this story, is that the technology that extends life is actually available to both the upper elites and those that are at the lower of the ladder as well. So it's available to everyone so long as they continue to take the treatment. I think they call it reju. I'm assuming rejuvenation or some shortage of the word, but so it is available to everyone, and that is where the dynamic between the two classes comes into play, because towards the very end, of course, Briggs begins to have doubts about his job and what exactly it is that he's trying to accomplish here. He goes to above the clouds to meet with one of the performers that he's having this relationship with, but she's very much disconnected from everything else that is happening below her. She's living the life she's lived for I imagine hundreds of years, and so this is what she's known. This is what this is her, but she's not. Perhaps I don't know if it's a case where because he was exposed to it because of his job and he's seen it, maybe he's developed some compassion for those people, but she's very much disconnected from it. Eventually he's faced with the choice when he decides, okay, he needs to find answers, so he locates this woman living out in the middle of nowhere, essentially, and she has a daughter, and he goes into the room, and he's there as the disposal unit. He's supposed to go arrest her, kill the child, and then make his report and move on. But he goes in, he tells her to sit, and he has questions. He wants to know why would you do this? And that moment was my what in terms of scenes in the entirety of this volume, that was the most chilling scene for me, this entire volume. Just them there having the conversation. It was very tense, and he's asking her why exactly, why would she do this, why would she create that thing, the child, why would you do that? And she explains to him, and this is the question: what would happen in a world where humans no longer need to procreate? Would there, why would you have children? I imagine the world is at a stage where the population, because no one is aging and no one is dying, that the population has gotten out of hand, and perhaps this is the worst case scenario where they have to, ensure that there's no more adage, and they have to create space. And that's one of the things, the very last thing that the woman says to him when things go awry, of course, is that she says, kill me, take me, I'll make space for her. So it was just it was a very just tense moment. She says to him that she's lived for hundreds of years, and she doesn't have anything to look forward to, and with this child that she now has, seeing things through her eyes, her first step her first words, the that amazement that we know that children have, in when they're at that age, when they're, when they're children, but that sense of wonder and amazement to everything around them. And she says, she sees that look in her eyes, and it gives her life meaning. But his eyes are devoid of that. His life has no meaning. And it was just a very compelling conversation to have. And there are two sides to it as well, because you do have to wonder as well, okay, why would she then want to bring that child into this world? And is she having the child purely for the purpose of giving meaning to her life? And is that the right thing to actually do? And so this was one of the episodes that was so conflicting, and it was just a very tense moment, and it was a very taxing episode to actually watch. It was I absolutely love this episode. After the fact, of course, he sits there after she answers his questions. The child begins to play with him until she wants his hat, and of course when he attempts to give it to her, the mom reaches for the gun. Things get out of control. He decides not to kill her. He grabs the gun back from her, decides not to kill her, walks out. His partner is there, and his partner hears the child crying inside, which means that you've defied your orders. And so they both pull their weapons and shoot each other, and he walks off in the distance and falls and dies. And yeah, it was a very grueling episode to watch, but I enjoyed that episode so much because of the questions that it raised. And I'm curious to know. I want to know more about this world. And I'm gonna be expounding on this a bit towards the end, because I have some. I want to talk about some things I loved about this season overall, and some ideas that I wonder whether some of these episodes actually tie into each other or not. But I'll get to that towards the end. But this episode was just one of my favorites this entire season, just by virtue of the world looked amazing. The social commentary that was being made, how things were resolved, leaving you curious to know what the repercussions of his actions were, because he killed his partner, he's dead. Does that mean that, okay, you've now made space for two persons, so can these two live, the mom and the child, or will they have to run and hide? Because I imagine more disposal units will come to that location as well. But it was a damn good episode, guys. It was a damn good episode, and certainly one of my favorites of this volume.
You're Snow, the albino.
No, I'm not.
Now don't fuck with me.
Not fucking with you. My name is Gelda Conley. They call me Whitey. Bounty hunters, right? What's he done, this Snow guy?
No, it's not me wants him. It's the merchant Barris. There's a big reward for his balls.
Balls?
All right, on to the next episode, episode 4, Snow in the Desert. Another fantastic episode. Snow in the Desert follows this character called Snow, an albino, who has regenerative DNA, and we first encounter him at this bar where some bounty hunters are attempting to take him in. He quickly dispatches them with the help of this mysterious character, Harold, that shows up. And then he rushes off. He lost an arm. Took it really well. But of course, with his abilities, of course, we later discover that he can grow that arm back within, I guess, within hours. And so he leaves, because he needs to get back home. He finds that he's being followed by Harold, and she says she wants to travel with him. She reveals that she knows, she's from Earth's Central Intelligence, and she knows pretty much everything about him. But unlike the bounty hunters that wanted to take him by force, to, I suppose, use his DNA to maybe, upset the cycle here, or maybe make themselves immortal, she says Earth's Central Intelligence wants him alive, wants him to come willingly. But the interesting thing with that conversation that they had, he said to her that morality is a human construct, and so he didn't think AI was capable of that. So it does appear as though they are on another planet. As we later hear one of the goons say, "Why would you live hundreds of years but choose to live in this horrible place?" So we get the impression that Earth is actually maybe ruled by AI that has discovered the singularity. And it's a possibility that they have expelled humans from Earth because humans are no longer necessary. One of the things I liked about this episode was just the design of the humanoid characters that we actually were introduced to, specifically the ones at the bar that appeared. It appeared as though you could see their musculature through their skin. They look very Titan, very, very colossal Titan-like in terms of their form. Not the size, of course, but it was just interesting. I found myself wanting to know more about this world, why Earth became the way it was, where did all the humans go? Could this possibly have been, since he's been there for centuries, perhaps humans were expelled from Earth by AI. They found the means of living on other planets, and over time they have evolved into different shapes and different forms. So that was really interesting. Of course, the very loving moment he was having with Harold gets interrupted later as the bounty hunters found him to cut off his balls. So they try to kill him, of course, almost succeeded. Harold comes to his rescue again. She gets killed in the fight, but he later learns, after she kills the guy that was the bounty hunter that was about to kill him, that she is essentially a machine. She did say that the exterior is not human, but inside is still, her brain is mostly human, and her organs and so on. But I don't know about that. Just looking at the structure that she had. The other thing is where she's coming from. She did say that, Earth in Central Intelligence values knowledge, and so initially when I hear that Earth is ruled, when I'm thinking that Earth is ruled by AI, you immediately think that they decided they're killing all humans because that's what we've seen in all science fiction films and all that. But I suppose the alternative could be that Earth, that the AI that is ruling Earth has found some way to live alongside other organic beings on Earth. Save for a few who weren't on board with that, and maybe those persons left to other planets. But perhaps there are those like her who have actually found a way to live amongst them. And so she's here. I guess they were hinting at her staying with Snow rather than returning home. They did say they want him to come willingly. I suppose if he's not willing to do that, then she will stay with him until he perhaps decides to go along with her. And if not, then he has a companion. He did speak about his wife in the episode, and she killed herself because she was aging and he was not. And so Harold, of course, being only part human and part machine, she would live for an exceptionally long time as well, and so they will have good company. So it was just a very interesting episode. I'm certainly, this certainly left me fascinated with the world itself, both the one they're on. I'm not sure what world they were on, but when she caught up with him in the first half of the episode, he asked her if she had a day tent, because apparently on this planet you can't roam around in the day. It's just too hot, and so you're only allowed to move around at night. So it's essentially it's just a very creative way to explain a lot of what is happening and where we are. And so I wonder what planet specifically they are actually on, and I'd love to know more about this world and all these humanoid creatures and characters that we've seen, what is happening on Earth. It was just a very fascinating episode that filled that sci-fi void that I've been missing of late.
Is something wrong with the engine?
Nothing of consequence. The boiler. Just need to build up another head of steam.
Then surely I have time for a smoke.
Yes, but don't wander. Once we're ready to go, I'll call for you to get on board. But only twice. Then we go no matter what.
All right, on to the next episode on our list, The Tall Grass. Now, this episode is one of those that I'll speak about towards the end about my theory about some of these characters, some of these episodes fitting into a larger world or some supporting some parallel dimension with Love, Death, and Robot overall. But I get into that towards the end. Essentially, The Tall Grass follows this businessman on a train going to his destination when the train stops in the middle of nowhere, and he leaves his cart because he says, okay, I want to take it's going to take some time. He says to the railman, it's going to take some time for you to fix this. I want to take a smoke. Railman says, don't go too far. Don't go too far. When the train is ready, I'll call for you twice, only twice. After that, we're gone. So he goes, he gets distracted by some lights, and of course, everything goes to hell. And you know what? This episode tapped into that fear that you have when you get lost. I remember as a kid, I getting lost once. I got off at the wrong stop in this neighborhood that I didn't recognize. I don't remember the details as to how or why I got off there. But it stuck with me since that day onwards, because when you find yourself in unfamiliar territory, the worst things in your mind starts to begin to come to the forefront, and you start thinking the worst possible things. And this was me during this episode, just freaking out for him because he's here in the grass, all right. He's seeing these lights around him. The train starts to, he starts to hear the engine of the train, and the railman starts to call out the first time. But he doesn't know which direction the light is coming from. And then another light passes him and he gets distracted. And he loses his bearings on distraction. And then he just gets lost. He starts running in every other direction. And the train moves off. And then he just sees this white creature. Looks sort of vampiric in nature. And it starts to chase him, and he runs, but he needs to get away from them, but he needs to ensure he's going towards the train, and things just escalated really quickly. And if you have anxiety, this episode will be horrendous. So just seeing the frantic nature of this episode, him trying to get to the train, he almost makes it. The creature grabs him by the leg and pulls him down. And the moment he thinks he's almost gone, there's the train. The railman comes down with a torch and starts to wave it around, and essentially saving him. And they race back to the track. But what intrigued me about this episode is what he said at the very end, where the businessman asks him, what were those things? And he says he thinks they were human, or they used to be, and he passes. It happens occasionally whenever he passes this point. It's as if some doorway opens up, and these things come through. And he mentioned, wondering whether these were people who were lost or people who got off at the wrong stop, and somehow found themselves here. And as I mentioned before, that it just brought me back to getting lost before, and just imagining being in this. Luckily, when I got lost, it was a suburban neighborhood, so there was no one around at the time, but it wasn't in the middle of nowhere with grass and no one in sight. So it just, that notion that, okay, perhaps this is where people who get lost, who've gotten off at the wrong stuff, who've lost their way, perhaps this is where they all find themselves, and eventually they transform and become something else, something unrecognizable. So it was a very interesting episode. Again, if anyone who's ever gotten lost before, or gotten traumatized by it, I wouldn't say I was traumatized, but I still remember the moment to this day. I remember exactly where it happened, where I got off, that feeling of, feeling of helplessness, and it would not have been helped by these creatures here chasing me, trying to eat me, or perhaps they weren't. And that's the interesting thing, because we don't know what would have happened. It appeared as though that's what they would have done, but we didn't know anything about the creatures. They were fighting over him, but could it have been that he would have become like them? I wouldn't have stayed around to find out, but yeah, this was an episode building a mystery, just telling you that this is what happens here, and just walking away and leaving you to sort of fill in the gaps of what you believe what their existence is. Where is this doorway? Where does the other side of this doorway actually open to? Is there perhaps some sort of portal to another planet where these things just come through, or is it as the real man suggests, and these are it's a bit more mythical, and these are people who, people and things that have just gotten lost along the way, or something, and somehow they've wandered to this one single spot. Of course, the real man says that, do not tell anyone about this, because they'll never believe you. But that was another interesting episode, and the animation choice that was used was just very interesting and unique, and it certainly sat with me for a while after after I relived my trauma. Alright, so moving on to episode 6, All Through the House. The answer to the question of what if Santa Claus was this giant, freakishly creature that snuck down your chimney every night to drink your milk, eat your cookies, and spit out the toys that you wanted. Yeah, that's the answer, guys. That is the answer. I feel as though they were intentionally trying to traumatize us with this one, taking something as pure and innocent from your childhood and flipping it on its head. Interestingly, this was definitely, I think this was the shortest episode of this volume, and it definitely gives credibility to the idea of, this fat man doesn't climb down your chimney every night. It's much more plausible that this alien-like creature does it. He's telepathically able to tell if you've been naughty or nice, and he knows exactly what present you actually want. Forget writing letters to the North Pole. No, here. So this was just a very fun episode, a very fun short episode to watch, and I found myself laughing through most of it, even though it was sort of supposed to be creepy. I think as a kid, I loved horror. That's my genre, right? So as someone who loves horror and loves animation, as a kid, this would have been something I would love to watch. So I would recommend this. This is probably the only episode in this volume that I would recommend, for kids to watch if your child is into, being scared shitless for several months, and they'd be quiet for a couple of days. Just try it. Yeah. All right, so we're on to episode 7, Life Hutch. Life Hutch, Michael B. Jordan makes his debut in Love, Death, and Robot. He appears to be a fighter pilot who was in the middle of an invasion or a war. His aircraft gets shot down, and he's forced to land on this planet. He makes his way to this outpost to try to signal help so he can be rescued. But as he gets inside, this maintenance robot begins to malfunction, views him as a threat, and attempts to kill him. This was survival from beginning to end. He's going up against this machine. There were, quite frankly, some very tense moments. I come back to that in a bit. The thing that interested me most about this episode was, the flashback to his cockpit, and he's discovering that, this tool that he may have not necessarily taken for granted, but a tool that you'd never have thought much of, the flashlight that he used in his cockpit to actually fix the device, was something that ended up saving his life later on. Whereas the maintenance bot, which is also a tool, but something more complex, is attempting to take it. And I don't know if perhaps he was trying to convey that, sometimes it's the simplest things that are the most effective. But it came to him that, okay, this is why, the machine will attack anything that's moving. All right, let me just use this. But before he even gets to doing that, he had to go through this grueling scene where he was trying to reach for it, for the flashlight. The maintenance bot came above the table over his head. He had to pretend to be dead, lie very still, slow his breathing. When it stepped down on his fingers, and oh my God, I don't think I would have been able to do that. He had to suppress the urge to scream, the pain. I can only imagine. That was, and he had to wait for the maintenance bot to get off his hand. And when we did see it, his pinky was crushed, it was mangled. But had to persevere. So this is all about survival. So he held out, slowly reached for the flashlight. The bot turned around and he had to just fake death, just be very still, lie very still, no movements, and eventually he was able to distract it with the light, and he realized it was trying to attack anything that moved. And using the light, pointing it to the bot's legs, it attacked itself, and he was able to get up and then just finish it then and there. But this was certainly a very interesting episode, a very tense episode. I would not have survived this. I will tell you that. There are very few episodes in Love, Death and Robot. Very few scenarios that I think I would make it through. Most likely it will be the very last episode, because there's not a lot that happens there. But that episode, I can see myself there. But everything else, no. I would just die. But luckily for him, he had the instincts to survive. He had the tools that he needed to survive. So he lived to fight another day.
What I found so fascinating was partly his immense scale, of course, but above all, it was simply the categorical fact of his existence.
Now, on to the 8th and final episode, The Drowned Giant. One of my favorite episodes this volume. The Drowned Giant follows a scientist, Steven, who, along with his teammates, discover a giant washed ashore on a beach. And the responses from both Steven and everyone around him as he observes them. One of the things I liked about this episode was how the format distinguishes itself from all the other episodes in this volume. First off, Steven only speaks once during the entire episode. He speaks at the beginning when his team begins to move towards the giant, and he says, "Come on, Steven, hurry up." And that's it. And he says, "Okay, I'm coming." And that's the only time Steven speaks. Outside of that, the rest is just his inner monologue, which feels as though they're just notes that he's making, and in large part, it does feel as though you're reading perhaps a report or a novel that he has written, and he's just giving his take on what he experienced. But in large part, I was conflicted by the end of the episode. How I felt at the very beginning differed so drastically from how I felt towards the end. And I think Steven mentioned it within the episodes itself, but it felt. I began to wonder how. At the very beginning, you felt this feeling of discovery and wonder, at the very beginning. But slowly, as you see everyone's reaction to the giant and what happens to it, that slowly devolves into spectacle, and I'm not. Perhaps that was the takeaway. Perhaps that was the message of the episode. I'm not sure. And Stephen himself even said it. He was relieved when he returned to the beach and the giant's head was no more. And the giant itself, it felt more human than the people around him. And one of the things I am curious about, it at the very end, are they eating the giant? I must know this. If I'm not sure if I'm the only one who noted, or if anyone feels the same way, because the last visit that he had there, before the giant was completely gone, yeah, there was a man there. I think he was having a cookout or something, but I remember seeing some barrel. I don't know. I felt as though they were eating the giant, and I want to know why. So I'm curious to know more about this world where, people will find this giant washed up ashore on the beach, but they quickly accept it and they quickly move on from it. And it reminded me of this quote from my favorite series of all time, which is Black Sails, where the main character, the protagonist, was having this conversation with one of the other characters, and he says, "We get used to the state of affairs for such a long time, it's easy to forget that they're all just transitions." And that's pretty much what this felt like, that we're at the point where nothing amazes us anymore. We discover all these great things, all these creatures, animals, fishes in the sea, whales, all of that. But, initially, when these things were discovered, there was this sense of wonder and wanting to protect these things. But now, we have them in zoos, dolphins and whales performing in captivity and all that. And now they're just there for pure entertainment. And we've transitioned from one point to the next. So it was just really fascinating to see. I do want to know more about this world where, we'll find a giant washed up on a beach. We'll quickly forget him by tomorrow, but we'll have his bone hung outside our store, and his penis essentially on display for entertainment. So it was just really fascinating to watch. I love Steven's mind. I think if I were there, I would share some of his beliefs, just watching them draw graffiti over the giant, as though that reverence for the dead was not there, because he was like them but not like them at the same time. It was just really fascinating to watch this episode. And again, this episode for me stood out much more than the rest. There are things there in all the episodes that I enjoyed a bit more, but this one was certainly one that I will not soon forget. All right, so there we have it, Volume 2 of Love, Death, and Robots. Another fantastic volume, of course. I do have some criticisms, but I did enjoy this season thoroughly. One of my criticisms for this season overall is, of course, the length, and I'm pretty sure many people will share that thought as well. However, I do understand why that may have been necessary. I think many of the, completing a lot of these stories and animation and the work that goes into it would have been affected by the pandemic over the last year, and so the team would have had to make adjustments. Working remotely, some of them may have needed to work. Return home, because if I remember correctly from the very first season, I think Tim Miller had mentioned that he brought in talent from different persons and studios from all over the world to work on it, to add their own, to give their own aesthetic to these stories. And so you may not have been able to do that with Volume 2, because these persons are restricted from, depending on what region you are actually in, and traveling restrictions and all that. So I do understand why the season may have had to be shorter than it would have been. There is a possibility, of course, that maybe Netflix felt the need to shorten the episodes, as in terms of their format going forward, and that I'd actually be fine with. As you know, I've said it many times, there is a real risk of writers' fatigue when when content is, the seasons are too long and there are too many seasons. I think at some point the writers do need to rejuvenate their creative juices and given the opportunity to deliver the same quality level across the board. So I prefer shorter seasons, and of course, I'm fine with the short episodes. So if that is the format going forward, only 8 episodes, I'm actually quite fine with that. But the other thing that I didn't particularly love this season, and it's more what was not here is the lack of 2D animation. Some of the best episodes in Volume 1 were Sucker of Souls, Good Hunting, and I think to some extent Zima Blue may have been somewhere between 2D and 3D. But I could be wrong, if I remember correctly, but I don't think there were any 2D animation in these stories for this volume. So I was a bit disappointed with that because I love that we are having these different stories. But one of the things that was fascinating about Volume 1 was how drastic the difference was from one episode to the next. But here in this volume, because there's no 2D animation, you feel as though everything here could be in the same world. There were some differences, of course, but there were still some similarities, and I would have loved to have seen 2D animation have a presence here, and it just didn't this season. And again, that could tie back to the bigger issue that I mentioned before about restrictions with COVID, because 2D animation is a lot more difficult to do. It's a lot more time. It requires a lot more time to actually do. And so I would completely understand, why that wasn't present for this volume. I think, assuming that Netflix isn't planning to just cut these seasons to 8, I think perhaps this season was intended to be longer, and maybe that included 2D animation episodes, but because those couldn't be finished with the time restrictions and with everything happening with the pandemic, they decided to cut those stories and deliver what they have for Volume 2, and then leave those stories for the next volume. So that's my assumption. I think perhaps because the 2D animation would require a bit more work, they decided to just release this, and then we'll probably pick that up in the next volume. So those are my only other 2 criticisms for the volume. Other than that, I enjoyed this thoroughly. I do think, from watching these stories, there are some subtle hints that a lot of these worlds may actually be connected. From this giant that showed up in the last episode, in episode 8, which harkens back to the Tallgrass episode where the businessman that got lost in the field. It appears as though he was lost, that he was shrunk down, and he was just in another world where larger creatures could literally live, and he was just a small person in the grass there. It just felt as though okay, could this tie back to the Drawn Giant? And then the railman, of course, spoke about a doorway being there that possibly leads to different worlds. And of course, then we had the episode with Snow and his DNA allowing people to live, to extend their lives and live a long time, which also could possibly tie back into the Pop Squad episode where humans have an unusually long life, and they've figured out how to do that by using this treatment called Reju. So I do wonder whether perhaps not Volume 1, but I do wonder if even Volume 2, if a lot of these stories are actually, somehow connected through some doorway that was mentioned in Tallgrass. So that was just fascinating for me. But overall, guys, I thoroughly enjoyed this episode. I thought the animations were fantastic. Again, I would have just loved to have seen more 2D animation, but outside of that, I love what the team has delivered, and I hope we get Volume 3 sooner than later. I think I did read somewhere that we will be getting Volume 3 sooner than we did Volume 2. So hopefully that is true. So be sure to post down below, let me know what your thoughts are. Remember to hit like and subscribe, and I'll see you for the next one.